actually becomes a barrier for the people that are living with those conditions, because there's an expectation now that people are going to say, well, this is what you should be acting like Greg House, not like what you're acting.
There you go. And so it creates fear in the minds of the everyday person. And you know what? It's not to say that there aren't some remarkably horrendous tragedies perpetrated by some people with remarkably serious mental illnesses. We certainly have the example of the fellow who beheaded a fellow passenger on the bus in Western Canada. And that puts the fear of God into all of us. And we extrapolate from that anyone who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia is at risk of homicide. And therein is the rub. That couldn't be further from the truth. Now let's think about that. Canada is a population of some 30 million people. And on one occasion, over the course of years, that happened. You have a better chance of being struck 6 times by lightning than that ever once happened.
But you saw the stories, and you saw the media response to that, Gary. And I think you actually came on the show and we talked about that. And it was a terrible tragedy, a horrific story. But the characterization was, well, that guy was off his meds, which created this conclusion that an awful lot of people drew that, well, if you're schizophrenic and you go off your meds, that's what you could do.
Correct. And so, you know, again, these are persons who are more likely to be inadvertently self-destructive, not destructive of others. People aren't running around beheading other people. That just isn't the case. And rather than putting the fear of God into us for these persons, because then we run away, then we don't want to offer our support, then we don't want to know these persons, then we inadvertently socially ostracize and cut them off from the group, which only creates further problems for them. So instead of that, we need to embrace all of our community, including those that have mental health challenges. We don't need to fear them. We need to embrace them. We need to support them. We need to offer housing. We need to offer solutions to empower them to manage with their unique challenges, just as we would for the person who's lost a limb.
There's another television show called Perception, and great Canadian actor Eric McCormick used to be on Will and Grace starred in this. And it's essentially about a guy who is schizophrenic. He's a professor, and again, when he goes off his meds, according to the television show, he's better able to solve some of these crimes that come forward. What a message to send, Gary.
Well, yeah, and it's also like the belief that I'm more creative when I'm high, when I'm smoked a good joint or taken some LSD. When we compare the works of persons high versus sober in their artistic endeavors, typically people do better sober than high. But there's these romanticized views that somehow or other, again, we have these superpowers. It's just not true. These are the myths, Bill. These are the myths.
Well, okay, but the other element of this is we just talked about the public perception. But, Gary, talk to me about what this is going to do for people that may be dealing with these issues. When they see these public perceptions and they see these characterizations on television, is it going to make them more or less likely to seek treatment and to seek help?
Well, it's like wearing the scarlet letter, isn't it? So if I acknowledge my depression, my anxiety, my bipolar, my schizophrenia, I'm going to cause you to be afraid of me. You are going to shun me. You're going to see me in a negative light. You're going to have nothing to do with me. Therefore, it increases my sense of shame and the likelihood that I'll keep it secret. Every couple of months or so, I'm part of a panel of presenters at the courthouse. We provide something called a mandatory information program to parents who are coming to court to resolve parenting disputes. And I represent the mental health portion of that presentation. And I talk to folks and I say, you know what, if you have a mental health disorder, for goodness sakes, don't think that it truly can be used against you in a court of law. In a court of law, what we're really concerned about is, are you getting the help you need? So don't take yourself off medications thinking that you have to feel some sense of shame, embarrassment, or that harm will befall you in the eyes of the court for having this problem. These are the issues that it creates, these television shows, these sensationalized media stories. that I, in my presentation to separating parents, have to tell them, if you have a mental health problem, just for goodness sakes, deal with it. Get the help you need. Stay on your medication. We just want to know that you're well, and that in and of itself shouldn't preclude you from seeing your kids and being a parent.
But when you see these characterizations, and you've talked about some of the ones on television, and even in some movies too, because I've heard the same criticisms about some of the ways that mental health issues were depicted, for instance, in Silver Linings Playbook. The message sometimes, and it might be a twisted message, Gary, is don't worry about it. It's no big deal. You can go off your meds, and in some cases, you might be better off your meds. And I think that's a problem to send that message out to people that are dealing with issues like that.
Agreed. So the problem, what the public doesn't understand, is that often with these medications, there are side effects. And so the person who is affected with a mental health disorder having to take medication, they may at times do a cost-benefit analysis saying, is the side effects of my antidepressant or bipolar medication, is it worth the relief that I get from my mental health disorder? And sometimes persons with mental health disorders also think, I've been on this medication for X months or years. Do I still need it? So we often see people taking what we refer to as a drug holiday to test, do I still need it, and in a sense, remind themselves what's the cost-benefit analysis between having the mental disorder versus the relief from the medication.
Well, what could happen if they do that?
Well, for some persons, they can plunge into their mental health disorder and, in a sense, get lost in that for a while. Typically, at some point in time, they find their way back to their physician. It could be through a loved one, and they typically find their way back to their medication. If they're so affected not being on the medication. And in other cases, the vast majority of them, the symptoms are not so severe as that they can sit back and they can appreciate, my symptoms have returned, this doesn't feel good, I think I'll go back on my medications, and they make very reasonable decisions for themselves.
But that roller coaster idea, we've talked about the psychological effects of certain medications on those conditions. It's got to have an effect on you physically, too.
Well, it does, but having a mental health disorder has physical implications. It's draining, it's fatiguing to have a mental health disorder because just moving through life is a tougher slog for you. Let me give you an example so that I think all of our listeners can understand depression and anxiety. If you think of yourself being immersed in a swimming pool with the water up to your chin, so this is depression. Just getting through that water, there is a resistance. It takes more energy. And that's what it's like moving through life with depression. Now, let's say there's some big person who's about to do a cannonball from the edge of the pool into the water. And now you're worried about being engulfed with the wave that's going to confront you, right? Negative anticipation of a future event. That's the anxiety. When persons go on an anti-anxiety medication, an antidepressant medication, it's not a happy pill. It's as if somebody's pulled the plug from the water at the bottom of the pool and is draining that water. So as the water level goes down and it reaches your waist, it reaches your knees, somehow or other you can get through the pool without the same resistance. You're less fatigued, and it's as if that depression has just somehow or other lifted. You're not happier. You're just not dealing with that resistance. From the anxiety point of view, if that person goes ahead and completes another cannonball, the wave that'll come towards you might take it from your knees to your thighs. I don't get anxious anymore. That's the impact of these medications, and that's a good way of understanding depression and anxiety.
Great analogy. Unfortunately, we're out of time. There's so much more. Let me direct people to your website, though. Yoursocialworker.com's got a lot of great insights and links to this sort of stuff. Gary, thanks as always. Great talking to you today.
Thanks for having me on, Bill. All the best.
You
Let's
too.
be healthy.
Gary Dernfeld, yoursocialworker.com. Check out the website. Back after the break, the Bill Kelly